So off the bat, spoilers for Egghead and Elbaf because we're going to get into a lot of time skip shenanigans. However, there is a theory that's been around for a very long time, at least as long as I've been reading One Piece, that Robin could be a D-Clan member. One theory I heard a while back, like 10, 20 years ago now, is that she could be the daughter of Goldie Roger. I don't think that's true. But the other is more interesting and has a bit more credence to it. She could be the eldest child of Monkey D. Dragon. And the ages do check out because currently in the story, she is just 30 years old, whereas Dragon is 55. So he has a 25-year gap on her. So it makes a lot of sense. On top of that, during the time skip, Robin spent time with the Revolutionary Army. So that's kind of peculiar there. It's also peculiar that Kuma sent Robin to a place in which the Revolutionary Army had presence, which was Tequila Wolf. So that's weird too, seeing as how Kuma was a founding member of the Revolutionary Army. So that's all very strange. And seeing as how Dragon and Kuma had a very intimate relationship, he could have told Kuma that he had another child elsewhere. On top of that, we never found out as to why Dragon visited Ohara after it was Buster called alongside Vegapunk to pay his respects, because there are no narrative ties that would bind Dragon to Ohara. So that within itself is weird. But we also know that Robin and Luffy have a very interesting relationship because they both think the same, because both of them have the idea to use non-Devil Fruit users Usopp and Zoro in order to get across the lake that separates the two halves of Punk Hazard. Also, Robin always seems to know how to best get information across to Luffy, which is quite funny, as she made him remember who Marco was by saying that his head looks like a pineapple. She too has very silly moments in which she just thinks about random things when information is presented to her, like the name of the country Dressrosa. She imagined a old lady dancing in a dress, or when Kuma was explaining his powers, she thought about cats. So that's very funny. But in addition to that, their relationship could reflect a relationship that we see currently in the narrative as it is going, because in Elbaf, the king of Elbaf, Harold, has had two lovers in his life. One that is considered his mistress and the other that is considered his wife, because we have Ida and Estrid. Estrid, the former queen of Elbaf, and Ida, his mistress. And through those relationships, he has gotten two sons, Hadouken and Loki. So, in that same way, Dragon could have had a relationship with Nico Olivia and whomever Luffy's mother is to sire these two children, presumably Nico D. Robin or Monkey D. Robin and Monkey D. Luffy. I think that's very possible. In addition, it's very funny that D's always have the funny habit of smiling when they're about to die. It was also revealed very recently that Harold himself might be a D, and he does smile when he's about to be struck down by his youngest son, Loki. But in addition to that, you know who else smiles when they think they're about to die? Robin, much like Luffy and like Ace, because in chapter 218, after she tells us her true dream and how the catacombs are crumbling around her and Nefertiti Cobra, she smiles, only to then be picked up by Luffy. So I find that very, very interesting. Now, in talking about Cobra, and again, spoilers, but Robin has the very funny habit of bringing up the D-Clan, but also being the one character who supposedly is not a part of the D-Clan, but funnily enough is associated with the most D-Clan based characters in the series through one way or another. Because, and again, spoilers, we find out that the Nefertiti family are a D-Clan family, which means with the events of Alabasta. She is both associated with Nefertiri D. Cobra and Nefertiri D. Vivi. In addition to that, we find out the most about her in Alabasta. Alabasta is also the place in which we are introduced to Portgas D. Ace, the brother of Luffy. She is also serving under Luffy, who is her captain. And of course, Luffy's full name is Monkey D. Luffy. But then, when you go back into her past, the two father figures that show up in her flashback are both D-Clan members. We find out that Clover is actually a D-Clan member. He is named Clow D. Clover, and he too has a brother. So that's kind of odd. I don't know if that means anything, but it's odd. But then we also have Jaguar D. Saul. So again, two more D-Clan members. But then when you look at the time skip, she spent time with the Revolutionary Army. And of course, the leader of the Revolutionary Army is Monkey D. Dragon. But when you go back into Wano, at the end of Wano, she has a solo adventure with D-Clan member named Trafalgar D. Waterlaw. So she has been associated with a cornucopia of D-Clan member characters, despite supposedly not being a D-Clan member herself. And I just find that very, very interesting. But when you see her fight with the flower fruit, it's very funny, especially now in the post-time skip, that her powers on the crew, other than, say, like Frankie's, are the most similar to Luffy, because she too becomes giant. She too technically stretches her arm out. She too can make giant limbs like Luffy. And I always found that super interesting, that her powers were that similar to Luffy. And they originally were a part of the same fruit category, as they were both Paramecia. However, we know that's not the case now, as Luffy is a mythical Zoan. So even with that being said, it's quite funny that they come to very similar conclusions in how to use their abilities. But with that being said, give me your thoughts and tell your friends about Polypede Wax It!